Okay, today I'm going to be doing a very comprehensive guide about drafting and champions, and this really only applies. I mean, this is tailored to solo queue, but the general knowledge it'll help you clash, custom games, whatever. But this is definitely tailored more towards solo queue because that's the experience that this is going to matter to most of the people. So, the first thing I wanted to cover was basic compositions, and I picked three here, and I'm going to briefly discuss some other stranger ones that you're not going to come up in as often. Although they do happen, and they are kind of unfortunate because they are very hard to play around in a solo queue setting where you don't have, five people talking to each other at once where you can communicate. Pings and talking in chat, which honestly you should be muted. You should honestly mute all chats if you're in solo queue because it'll just get you upset sometimes, and people really obviously don't really have too much good to say that contributes to winning. But anyway, let's jump right into it. So first thing I picked here was engage comp. And what that means is that's kind of like the Overwatch, if you want to say like kind of like Overwatch style, where it's like big ultimates that kind of chain into each other that if kind of succeeded correctly and is executed where all the ults can kind of go off in quick succession. The enemy team's just gonna probably get bursted down through CC and a lot of like heavy damage, which Malphite has insane engage with his ult, which is not only unstoppable but has pretty good base damage. And Yone, I think of like anything that has hard engage dashes. So something like a Yone jumper on Malphite ult. Don't think something like a smaller type of dash, for example, like a Pyke. A Pyke wouldn't really be engaged because that sort of dash that he does, that animation takes too long, and it's not snappy enough. And he could be CC during it. Think Nautilus, even though that rule isn't applied too much with Pyke because Nautilus has way bigger range than Pyke does, and Nautilus also has not only point and click CC, but his every auto basically is going to CC somebody. But the big thing with his engage is obviously his hook, skill shot, which is ridiculous range, and his ult, which is point and click, and also his great range as well. And so an engage comp, just to sum it up, think also like an Orianna, huge big AoE ults that have CC and that can chain into people. That's what you want to think of when you think of engage. This is what you want to basically prioritize the most when you're playing solo queue, because these are champs that most people are going to be able to play, and this is by far the easiest to execute. When the enemy team is grouped up and like near the dragon pit or at a choke point, you simply just spam ping all in. You have your team. You have to wait for your team obviously to be with you. A big mistake people do is they'll ult in. They'll be like, "Why is no one here? What is my team doing?" Well, you'll realize if you're on lock screen, your teammates might be 100, 200, units away from you, and then they don't have the time to follow up. So you can't be too aggressive. You have to be with your team. But to execute an engage comp, basically just wait for your team, press ult, and it kind of just plays itself. Front to back is the second most common comp you'll definitely see. I personally think it's very underrated. I think front to back comps are really, really good when you have a Fed AD carry or a Fed mid laner like an Orianna or a Ryze that needs to be supported and can't just dive in, obviously because they're ranged. And a way a front to back comp is executed is you almost 100% of the time need a really well trained support. And what I mean by that is a champ like Janna, a champ like Poppy, a champ like Nami, where they have abilities that can either push the enemy team away or stun the enemy team. And obviously Janna is a great example of that because let's say you get dove by a Yone, right? He is unstoppable while he dashes, which is unfortunate, but once he's on top of your priority like champion you're trying to defend, like let's say Zeri right here, for example. If Yone ults on top of Zeri, Janna has a shield she can place down on Zeri, which is perfect. But her big thing is she has a tornado, and she has her ult, which are some of the best peel abilities in the entire game. Her ult especially, because it's just an AoE pushback. Her whole kit is basically designed around peel. And peeling, if you don't know, obviously if I haven't specified enough, that's just getting the enemy team off your team. Poppy's also great for that. She can kind of tackle people into walls and kind of stop them right in their tracks, which is perfect peel. Even think Asante, he can push people with him. Mordekaiser too is a really strange peel champion. Because let's say Yone ults onto your AD carry who's 20 and 10, right? He's like your ADC is carrying your team. If your ADC dies, the game's basically over because you have no way else to kill the enemy team. A Mordekaiser could ult the Yone that's diving your carry and basically just kind of chill in there in the ult for like a few seconds and just waste some time. So yeah, that's a front to back comp. You want to defend your ADC while you're not just full diving. You're kind of moving back and forth, and you're just trying to deal damage while your front line is taking the most of it. So you need a tank for sure for a front to back comp. You need a tank. You need a good support like a Janna or a Nami, and you need a big damage dealer that's preferably ranged. Because if you have a Talon mid, right, or a Kassadin mid, how are you gonna really peel that? The Talon or a Kassadin's gonna dive in. How's your Janna gonna save that guy, right? A Janna can't save a Talon that's in the middle of 5 people. So that's a front to back comp in essence. You definitely need a tank, which will have to probably be in top or jungle, because you're going to need a support that has the ability to get people off, like a Janna or a Nami. Poppy's the one exception to that. Poppy you could probably run as your one tank for your main peel, but you do need another tank to be your meat shield frontlining. So yeah, 2 biggest components of that is having a frontline and having a core peel champion like a Janna. Enough about front to backing. Let's get to picks. Now, picks is a very unfortunate situation. This is a pick comp. You want to pick part of the enemy team off in. What you're going to find here is if people play, egotistical champs in solo queue like a Kassadin, like a Talon, like a Pyke, like a Rek'Sai, any sort of bursty champs that don't really have a great team fight because they either have to get into an extremely compromising position to kill the enemy team, or they really just have too much single target damage and they really can't do much else once their main abilities are used and they have too many cooldowns. So you'll find yourself sometimes, you'll have a Pyke locked in. Maybe they'll win lane, but Pyke's team fight's really not too great unless you can get resets with your ult. If you have a Rek'Sai, his team fight's not too great. So what you want to try and do is, if your team's ahead, which if your team's not really ahead with a pick comp, you're basically going to lose. There's not much you can really do there unless the enemy team throws. But what you can do, vision is extremely important, and this is why pick comps are bad. Because in solo queue, people aren't coordinated, teams aren't coordinated, vision's very hard to get. And pick comps are going to require you to buy a lot of control wards, a lot of sweepers, so that you can get the enemy team to not have vision. And when the enemy team doesn't have vision, they won't know you could be camping in a bush as a 5-man. You can get a quick pick. And that way, with all the bursts you have, you can utilize that. And so now that if it's a 5v4 late game, if you're on a 45-second cooldown death timer, you're going into a fight with a 5v4, and with a pick comp, that's really going to help you because you're not really going to have the resources to just 5v5 clash, use your ults, who's going to win, right? Because the pick comp is kind of reliant on killing people fast, and they're not really going to have too much synergy because their ults are pretty weird. So let's move on. Now, to types of champions. I've broken this down into 6 different groups that I've underlined right here, you can see. And I kind of put little subsets down. So I'm going to just go left to right. And so starting with mages, which I'm by far the most experienced in, I can give some insight into this for sure. The mage class is definitely, most of them are broken down to 3. I mean, mage, tanks, and marksman. But starting with the mages, a battle mage, you can think Vladimir, you can think Ryze. Stuff that's not going to have too much CC and has a ridiculous amount of damage output. Ryze late game, Vladimir late game, you're going to be getting in at least 50,000 plus damage if the games last over 35 minutes. Now, the reason why something like a Vladimir would be a hardcore battle mage is because he has no CC. Ryze, on the other hand, does have a lot of damage, but his CC is not great, even though it's point and click. The range on it's worse than you'd think it is, and the cooldown, unless you're like 40 minutes in where he has a very high amount of ability haste, the cooldown's not great. Something like a Ryze or a Vladimir is a battle mage, right? They want to be fighting. Their 1v1's usually not strong, but either their 2v2 or their team fighting is phenomenal. That's their strength. As a battle mage, you do not want to be trading too much in lane because your base damage is going to be very low. And unless you're something like a Vladimir where you have sustain, which is the really one exception, something like a Ryze or any other battle mage champ is not going to want to fight too much in lane. Their main goal is to survive lane 2v2 and perform during team fights. Now, something like a burst mage, you want to think Syndra, Orianna, right? Orianna is by far the most prevalent burst mage I can think of. Even Hui. Hui's a little weird because he can be considered a control mage with some of his, because he's a very utility-oriented champion, but also has a ton of damage. But burst mages are usually going to be able to win lane. They'll harass, Orianna, Syndra, Hui. They have a lot of range. They have pretty good mana sustain with the runes and the build options they take. Once they get Lost Chapter, they can stay in lane for a very long time. Their main goal is to push the lane out, harass you as much as possible, and they're going to keep you under tower while they can roam, and they can contribute to team fights. And they can maybe one-shot a guy in a team fight and then provide some extra utility. What you're going to see that looking like is if a Hui's at a team fight, he'll do his full damage kit, and then after that he'll be sitting back waiting for his cooldowns. He'll maybe use some other utility things, and then he'll wait for his resets. Orianna obviously is pretty self-explanatory. She's just going to shoot her ult in there, burst you guys down, hit a huge ult, and then just kind of play supporty after that. So they're very front-loaded. Once they use their abilities, they don't have too much going for them, like a Syndra as well. She uses her huge burst kit. Her E is on like a 10-second cooldown, and that's all her CC that she's got. So you got to be very careful with that. Next, we got tanks. And tanks, I think, are really strange because tanks have, there's something like a Dr. Mundo where they're just like a meat shield. They're sitting in the front, and they're kind of just smacking people and hoping that your team does damage because they don't have really any utility. Something like a peel tank, however, I think is really strong, and so is Engage. I think Engage tanks are obviously the most prevalent and the most you're going to see in solo queue. Think Malphite, think Poppy, stuff like that. Even Singed is just going to run at them. But I could see that as kind of a battle tank as well because he's going to be a meat shield. But think about a peel tank, something that has CC and that can kind of defend your team. That's sort of what a peel tank is. Marksman. What I want to think about a marksman, a burst marksman, you could definitely think something like a Lucian, where their auto attacks aren't really they're going to be most of their damage from. They're getting their damage from their abilities and stuff like that. Something like an Ezreal, however, wouldn't be considered that because he definitely falls under the poke category. And in my personal opinion, I think poke champs are very weak. I don't think their team fighting is very great, and I think in lower elos where you really have to be able to space well, where people don't know how to do that, it's very hard. Like if you're playing Xerath, unless you have phenomenal vision and you have great spatial awareness, that Malphite just is going to press R and he's going to kill you no matter what. He's going to be unstoppable. He's going to be on top of you and you're dead. But I'd say the best mage marksman by far is the front to back. Think Jinx, think Kog'Maw, think Jhin. Those are champs that are kind of just moving forward and back over and over again, staying behind their team. Those are by far the easiest to execute. Now, fighters and assassins, you'll notice I put a big red fight in between them. I didn't put any other really category. That's because I'm thinking stuff like Darius, stuff like Riven, where you're going to notice fighters usually have terrible range. A Renekton, they got to get right in your face. And something like a Ryze or a Twisted Fate or something that has range CC that can hold you back is going to counter you, and it's going to make team fighting very difficult. So what people like fighters want to do is they want to be really 1v1ing in the side lane, and that's what you see them doing. There's a reason why top laners split push, because they really just want to 1v1. A Darius can't really team fight into a range comp, unless he can get a great flash ghost, flank around, which is very difficult to do. You really can't get close, because they're going to space you out. They might have a tank in front of you that's going to be hard to get your first reset off of. And that same exact thing applies with assassins. Assassins, what they really want to do is they want to either push the lane out, or if they're getting abused in the lane, like a Sylas or a Talon, they might just take the wave. They might just let the wave crash in their tower, and they might just leave. And they're gonna look to kill other people on a roam. That's how you kind of identify these champion identities. These fighters and assassins, they can't team fight too well, so they have to look for other options. They can't play the laning phase too great, like a Talon. He needs to roam. A Darius just wants to split push. Their laning phases are strong. However, fighters usually have very good laning phases, not assassins part per se. Moving on to supports. Now, supports are very, very, very mundane and shallow, I think. I think it really only goes on to two things. You got Peel. Think Lulu, Yuumi, Nami, Janna, right? Champs that can just heal, shield, or push the enemy away from you, right? Speed boosts also, speed boosts are big. Zillion. And then also Engage. Leona, Nautilus, stuff like that I think is very, very kind of surface level. And I think is fairly easy and well known. These are the types of champions. Now we're going to be moving into something that I really want to get into. And this is kind of the meat and potatoes of the video itself. These are matchups. And this is something I think people don't really realize when they play these sort of champs. So I picked Ryze versus Warwick here, because I think this is a great example. Even though many people don't play Ryze, the fundamental thing I'm going to be bringing up applies to every single champion in the game. And this will help everybody that kind of picks up on this. So Ryze is a champ where he's ranged. He doesn't have a dash. So something like a Warwick that is very up close, on a service level, you think, okay, Ryze is going to counter Warwick. Ryze is going to run away. Warwick's going to run in a straight line towards him. Ryze is going to be able to CC him with his point and click and just run. And that will allow his teammates to maybe follow up and burst Warwick down. However, since Warwick's not a champion that has a little dash like a Briar, right? Briar's got a little dash, not the greatest gap close. Warwick has a massive, unstoppable dash that can basically go across the screen. That fundamentally counters a champion like Ryze that doesn't have a dash that can dodge it, because Ryze heavily requires or relies on speed, and you can only get that speed if you hit a champion. So if Warwick wants to really fight Ryze, he can just ult right on top of him, and although Ryze can maybe CC him, he'll be right on top of him. As soon as that CC goes down, if Warwick has Mercury Treads or any sort of tenacity, he will just run you down. So unless a champion has a dash that can kind of avoid hard engage, like think a Malphite ult or a Warwick ult, they are going to be fundamentally countered in a team fight or later on in the game. Earlier on though, like pre-level 6, 2v2s in a case where it's like Lee Sin and Ryze versus a Warwick and something else, Ryze can CC Warwick. Warwick has no way of escape because unless he flashes, because he doesn't have that huge unstoppable dash with his ult yet. Lee Sin has the follow-up burst to kill Warwick. So that's that kind of 1-2 combo that I brought up earlier. Next up, great example of a hard counter, something like Jhin and Malphite. Now, you might be thinking ADCs counter tanks, don't they? Well, not in this situation, because Jhin, as I said before, like Ryze, requires movement speed, and he cannot proc that unless he hits something. Malphite doesn't need any of that, because his ult not only is unstoppable, but it's a huge dash. Huge dashes are what I'm really focusing on. If a champion like Jhin doesn't have any sort of dash, unless he flashes, which is pretty hard to react to, and it's on a 300-second cooldown, half the time, or more than half the time, Jhin won't have it up. Malphite will catch Jhin every time if he's in range of his ult, because Jhin has no way to dodge it. A huge hard engage giant dash is going to fundamentally counter something like a Jhin. Next up, though, on the other side of the spectrum, we have Twisted Fate and Briar. And this is a case where a ranged champion is going to counter something like Briar, because Briar, unless she ults, which her ult is incredibly easy to dodge because you can just get off long screen and see it, most of the time her ult is not what's going to be hitting you. It's going to be her fighting you herself. And that's where she really needs to snowball in the early game. Briar can be CC'd from basically any range that Twisted Fate has, because Twisted Fate outranges Briar completely, and her dash is very small. So, Twisted Fate, Briar's going to run right at him. Twisted Fate can simply throw a gold card out, and that will stun her. At that point, he can throw a Q out, he can auto a little bit, and he will run away. Twisted Fate is a control mage, and he also is a burst mage. I would say much more burst mage than control mage, but burst mages don't really want to fight 1v1s unless they're really fed. Twisted Fate is a pseudo support champ, so in this scenario, he wouldn't really want to be fighting Briar anyway. He would gold card her, and he would not really continue to fight. He would run away, because Twisted Fate champ like him wouldn't really be looking for a 1v1. He wants to look for picks with his team. Finally, Kassadin and Syndra. Now this is a little bit more advanced in the sense that Kassadin has a lot of dashes, but he doesn't have a huge dash like Malphite or Warwick. Only issue is something like a Syndra. Kassadin can not only teleport through her CC, but if he were to get CC'd by Syndra, the CC duration on Syndra's E is about a second. Kassadin's dashes are very long, so he can keep dashing even after getting CC'd, and he will catch up to her. So that's kind of a fundamental counter. So moving off these character matchups, the number one thing I want you guys to memorize is that if your champion requires movement speed, he or she's countered by hard dashes. Think like the Malphite Jhin interaction, right? Jhin has nothing he can do unless he flashes away. So that's a great counter. Thinking about, does this champ have a dash? No. Does my champ have a huge dash? Yes. I will probably get on top of them, and I will just beat them after I ult by stat checking them. Now we have a win condition. So this is something that people don't really know how to pick up on. And when you're kind of mindlessly playing solo queue, Peel though, because that follows what I said before. When I went back to this page, she doesn't have a dash, right? Something like a Lucian that's a little closer range, he has a dash. He can dash away from a jump, right? Like a Malphite ult, he can react to it. Jinx can't. Jinx can't do any of that. And so she's kind of going to require you to have a peel reliant comp, and she's a hyper carry. If a Jinx is fed and you have a good front to back team comp, the game should be won 80% of the time. Same thing goes with Kog'Maw, right? I just think Jinx is a much harder carrying champion. Something like an Ori, if your team, Ori is a champ where even when she's useless and she's like 0 and 9, she can still have a lot of utility, but a fed Orianna I guarantee you, if a Fed Orianna is on the enemy team, the thing that should be going through your mind is, I need to kill her first. Because if she hits like a 3, 4, 5-man ult, you're going to lose. If she's fed, she's going to do a ton of damage, her ult's going to be too high impact, and the game's going to be very hard to win. So the number one thing you need to think about when you have the identifying win cons on your and the enemy team, it's what champion is going to have the most agency and ability to win the game, right? Champs like Jinx, champs that have just a ton of damage, or damage with CC that scale, which champs that have CC and damage are not going to be good early game because that'd be broken. Think stuff like Ryze or Orianna, for example. Those are the things you want to target. The something that would never be the enemy win condition or your win condition has been like a Poppy, right? Poppy's a tank. She has the ability to CC a lot of people, but she doesn't do enough damage late game, and she can't 1v9 a team fight unless the only way she would 1v9 a team fight is if she were to stun somebody and make which would require the enemy team to play bad. What you want to be thinking about is something like a Jinx. A Poppy's not going to be able to 1v9 the game unless she gets ridiculously fed and no one on your team is fed. A Jinx can single-handedly carry a game if her entire team is doing terribly and she's fed and they just play around her, which would mean you need to focus her only. Because once you kill her, the team has nothing else to do. They have nothing else to fall back on. So that is these are kind of all the topics I kind of wanted to cover. If there's one thing this video teaches you, it's this page. It's just about if you have a dash and the enemy doesn't, that automatically gives you the advantage to engage on top of them right away. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope this is a little bit different content structure. It's not just me explaining gameplay and some sort of in-the-moment decisions. This is more scripted and definitely covering some topics that will definitely help you when you go into games and as you think about them. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you very much.